Welcome to Connect to Joy. Your host, DeChaine, is an intuitive spiritual guide for practical matters and marconic multidimensional energy practitioner. Her quest is to help you realize new possibilities, discover and release what holds you back, and enable you to manifest an inspired life filled with joy. Join us on this journey of transformation. Now, here's your host, DeChaine.
Welcome, beautiful spirits. We assume things thousands of times a day, or probably more than that. We go off the evidence we see, which we assume are facts, and come to some sort of conclusion. It can happen in a blink of an eye. The problem is we color the evidence with all of our past issues, stories, and sometimes there really is no evidence, but we assume a conclusion anyway. But that isn't always to our benefit, because a conclusion can be totally erroneous, incorrect. And while I hesitate to use the word because there's so much judgment on it, the conclusion can be totally wrong. Assumptions can make us worry, create drama, and may not be based on fact or truth at all, which means we aren't living in the joy that I want to help all of us find and connect with. Sometimes there are things we mull over for a long time, and sometimes we make the assumption so fast we don't even realize we're doing it. The old saying, and I hope this doesn't offend anyone, it's that to assume something to be true can make an ass out of you and me. It does hold true. Not always, but enough to bring some attention to this. The questions are numerous, and I hope to answer at least some of them today. These are the questions I'm looking at. What is an assumption? Where do we get the facts to base our reaction to an assumption? In other words, what colors our assumptions? How do we know when we're making one? How can we know if our assumptions are actually based on facts? What happens when our assumptions are wrong? Is there a process to use before we make assumptions? Yes, I've made one up, and I'm going to give that to you. And lastly, how should we respond when others make assumptions about us? And again, I have a process I put together, and I'm going to give you that today as well. Let's start with what an assumption is by beginning with the definition of assume. One of the definitions for assume in Merriam-Webster says to assume is to take as granted or true, or to suppose. For assumption, Oxford Dictionary says it's a thing that is accepted as true or as certain to happen without proof. It's kind of in italics in my head, not in the dictionary. Synonyms for assumption are supposition, presumption, premise, belief, expectation, conjecture, speculation. Are you getting an idea about this? Surmise, theory, hypothesis, and even guess. So an assumption? It's starting to sound like we need to be a little more careful when we assume things to be true. Because when we make an assumption, we're basically looking at the facts at face value, unless we have the time to go deeper, and then we guess at what the truth may be. And then we formulate a reaction to what we assume to be true. And like I said, that can all happen in the blink of an eye. And that may work for us sometimes, but it can also get us into trouble. So what colors our assumptions? Those things that we think of as facts, where did those things come from? Well, the ones I'm going to look at today are comparisons to what facts we think we know already. What we hear, what we read, our emotions, who the person may be to us, and our past. So let's look at each of those things. First, comparisons to other facts. We may compare what we're reacting to something we already know. It may be close enough that we then assume that what we're reacting to should also be true. We know the sky is blue, and someone says the opposite, so we know they're wrong. We know because these things have been proven, at least to our satisfaction, whether scientifically or however. But the A plus B equals C that we know to be true may not be true on every occasion if things are slightly different. There may be multiple facts we compare the source of our assumption to, and they may all line up to prove our assumption correct in our mind. But there may be more evidence we aren't seeing that shifts our perspective in the end and makes us incorrect in the assumptions that we've made. Let's move on to what we hear. By this I mean tone of voice of the person talking to us. We might think we hear sarcasm or anger, annoyance, maybe even condescension or any other number of tones coming at us from this person who's talking to us. And that may play heavily on what we assume the other person means by what they say, what they're thinking, or what they feel, and therefore we react a certain way. The problem with this is that another person may just be having a bad day, and we may take the attitude we hear in their voice personally, like it's directed at us because it feels like it, when perhaps that couldn't be further from the truth. We also may make assumptions on what we read, especially nowadays in email and text and social media. So many people unfriend people on social media or break ties with friends when they've read something. We read the post, but we can't hear the tone of voice to know if someone is kidding or what they mean by what they say. Some things seem pretty clear, but honestly, we can't always really tell from reading the post, the text, or the email what the person actually means, what they're asking us to do. They might just be complaining about the world in general, when without any further clarification, we may feel hurt, alienated, worried, or any number of feelings, all of which may have absolutely nothing to do with the truth of what they meant. Our emotions also color our assumptions. The minute you feel hurt or angry or upset in any way from what someone says or writes to you in a text or email, you may not be thinking clearly when you make an assumption. If we immediately fall into worry, we can't always see the silver lining and may in fact be seeing only the worst case scenario. Our logical mind may shut down when our emotions roll over us. Oh, and while these aren't emotions, our beliefs can also color our assumptions. Our religious beliefs, our beliefs of right and wrong, our ethics, all of our beliefs may lead us not only to judge people, but to assume what they could say may mean something other than what they intended. Who the person is can also definitely color our assumptions. If it's someone you love and they say something hurtful, you may give them more leeway, the benefit of the doubt, or maybe less leeway if they haven't been trustworthy or treated you poorly in the past. If it's someone in authority and you respect that, you're more likely to believe what they say. That's an assumption. But maybe you even automatically assume what a person says is the truth or a lie depending on that specific person and who they are. And lastly, the past that we have pretty much colors how we react to pretty much everything. I mentioned authority figures a moment ago. And if you have a past where authority figures were not trustworthy or they treated you wrongly, you'll more than likely assume something differently from someone who respects authority figures. If you haven't been able to trust a romantic relationship in the past, you might assume your current person will treat you the same way, and you might jump all over them if you even think they're acting that way, even if they are totally innocent. And if anyone already treated you poorly, if that same person says something even slightly off in your mind, you'll probably make assumptions about what they mean in a negative way. These assumptions can be our self-conscious or even our conscious mind trying to warn us from past history as a sort of self-preservation or survival instinct, which isn't a bad thing, but make sure they don't impact your assumptions in a bad way, in a way that's not true, because perhaps that new love interest totally was not going in that direction, but you really pounced on them because that assumption you made had nothing to do with them, but everything to do with what a former lover would have said and how they would have treated you. Moving on to how do we know when we're making an assumption? Because the word alone, you might go, what? What is she talking about? But we make so many assumptions every day, you might not even be aware of it. If you feel an immediate emotion, check out why you do, because you just made an assumption of what somebody meant. And it could be true. It's true how you feel, But is it true what they said and what they meant, which caused that reaction? If you read a text or a social media post and you have any reaction to it at all, you made an assumption. Do you believe what they said? Disbelieve it? Judge it? Those are all assumptions. We assume drivers will turn right when they have their blinker on. Well, you know how often that happens. Or that they're not going to turn right when they have their blinker on. And they do that too. We assume children will cry when they're unhappy. Some do. Some are unhappy and they just look around to see if you're there, and they'll only cry when you're there. Like I said, we assume a lot of things, many of which make total sense to everyone. But that doesn't make them facts, or even true for that matter in a specific time frame and a specific incidence. How do we know if our assumptions are based on facts? Well, that depends on what you think of as facts, I guess. If science has proven something, people thought the Earth was flat for most of the Earth's history, but both Magellan and Columbus and a number of other explorers proved that to be wrong, and eventually science caught up with that and proved that. If the human population as a whole believes in something, like murder is bad, hijacking a car is bad, although we even have qualifiers for most of those, killing in self-defense or in a war is okay, and some people believe or don't believe that capital punishment is okay. Hijacking a car, if you're a police officer and you're in pursuit of somebody, might be okay, but then again, that might just happen in the movies. I could be wrong about that. We take a lot of things for granted, that they are facts and they are truth, but lots of things aren't. They fall into a gray area, or they're only truth for you and maybe not for the rest of the world. If we make assumptions and they're wrong, what about that? How does that impact us, and what do we do? Well, first, we might get really confused. If you know for a fact in your mind you've made an assumption and you assume it's fact, you may all of a sudden get very, very confused because your mind will stop and go, what? And you have to almost reboot your brain to get it to go back in gear, to get it to understand that what you thought was right or assumed was right isn't. Anybody who's ever had a spouse cheat on them is going to have to reboot their brain, because if you had no clue whatsoever and all of a sudden you get this information and you know you're not assuming anything, but you get evidence in front of you that appears to be truth, the confusion, the anger, all those feelings can be very, very strong. And you may have to actually reboot your brain in order to get it to understand what happened. Other things that can happen if we make assumptions and they're wrong is we can make ourselves crazy because we start worrying about something or someone. For example, if your boss starts acting or saying things out of character, you might start worrying your job is in jeopardy. But it could be not the truth whatsoever. If your child says or acts a little differently or starts having different friends, you might think they're starting on a bad path or using drugs, which might be totally wrong. Hopefully. You might act differently around people because you took something to heart. That was an incorrect assumption. You could end up creating drama or confrontations that aren't necessary if you assume something that's a total misunderstanding. Romantic relationships, especially at the beginning, can end abruptly if you accuse someone of something because you made a false assumption, or if you thought that something was different than what it truly is. You might damage a friendship or lose the friend altogether if you shut them off or cause a scene if your assumption is incorrect. False assumptions can injure relationships with your parents, your children, your siblings, and just about anyone if things go south. And of course, situations that deal with your job, your living arrangements, and so many other things can get impacted from the assumptions we make. What's true? What's not? And how do we know? So, what can you do? If you make a false assumption, first forgive yourself for getting something wrong. We're all human. Things happen. It happens. And then you may need to forgive the other person for coming at you in a certain way that wasn't clear for you. You didn't get it. It came off as a specific way that you thought was something. and it wasn't. You may need to apologize to the other person if need be, if you confronted them with something. But if you do, tell them what happened, what you thought they meant, what your assumption was, and why you reacted the way you did. If it was from your past or whatever it was, just let them know, but don't do it as though you're being in self-defense or justify what happened. You don't need to justify yourself. Just explain what it was so they understand. You might want to ask them for forgiveness if you feel the need. You might be able to repair your relationship with the person and make it stronger if they understand what happened and why. One really good thing to do is to notice if a pattern comes up with specific assumptions that you make, especially the ones that go wrong, because you're going to go, wait a minute, I did this already. It might be the same pattern that comes up with the same person. Or it might be the same pattern, but with all different people. If, for example, a romantic connection, maybe you make it with the same pattern with all the different romantic connections, all those same assumptions about somebody maybe abandoning you or meaning something that they don't necessarily mean. Or maybe it's a boss that you make the same assumptions for over and over again. They don't appreciate me. They won't promote me. They won't give me a salary increase. Maybe you have those assumptions for some reason. But once you know what your pattern is, you can work on it, because awareness, as they say, is always key. And most of the work starts with figuring out what's going wrong, that awareness. And then you can not worry. Know that it's okay to make a mistake. Once you do what you want to do to repair a relationship or the situation, and it's really all you can do, try to let it go. And then learn from what happened, because that lesson is important so it doesn't repeat itself. I want to get into that process I mentioned that you can use before you make an assumption that may or may not be right for you. First, take a moment and don't respond immediately if you don't have to. Take that breath. And second is to check in and name your emotions. What are you feeling? Are you feeling worry, anger, hurt? And then on top of that, if you can understand why what they said or wrote made you feel that way, you are way ahead. Third, and most important, don't assume that what they said or what you read is negative or a personal attack. Well, at least not yet, because you have to know that sometimes it's got nothing to do with you. So try not to take it personally. And number 4, if you aren't sure if what they said, if it's not absolutely clear, ask questions and get clarification. You might want to say something like, you said, or you wrote, blah, 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 and repeat what they said. And I was wondering, what did you mean by that? Could you be more specific? Maybe you might want to say, could you clarify that? And once you get that information, you don't have to give them anything else right now, unless they said something specifically. Oh, I just meant, and then they say something and you go, oh, is that all? And you can either let it go, because what you do next is reevaluate your original assumption. So you just got more information. You need to be flexible. Don't hold on to your original assumption if you got new information. Now, if you get a strange feeling the person is backpedaling and they really meant what you thought, you might want to pray and connect and see maybe if you can get clarity from a higher source. Because maybe people don't want to admit that they were being mean or nasty, or they were really kind of digging at you in a strange way that you're going, wait, did you mean what I think you did? And they go, oh, no, I didn't mean that. But if they always say things that dig at you in a kind of a funny way or something, kind of a Don Rickles way, if you ever saw that comedian, he would dig at people. He'd be nasty to people and people would laugh. And to me, I never thought that was funny. But if you look at somebody and they impact you and you're going, that person doesn't love me the way they say they do, or they wouldn't put me down all the time. Even though they say it's funny and they're not meaning it, they mean it somewhere at some level. Know that you need to protect you. So when you reevaluate your original assumption, don't just go exactly by what the person says, even if you get clarification from them. Because the sixth step is decide how you want to respond. You want to know, is this anything big? Do I need to really even be concerned about this? Will it impact you or your relationship down the road, next week, next month, maybe next year, or 10 years from now, if you don't say something? Would it get worse, whatever it is? And really, how important is what was said or written or what happened ultimately to you? And then, of course, your assumption will be based on a whole lot more information than you had in the past, so you can make a much more comfortable response than you might have previously. Let me go over those one more time, those 6 steps. So first, before you react to the person, take a moment if you can. Don't respond immediately if you don't have to. Second is to check in and figure out how you're feeling so that you know if you've been hurt or you're angry or whatever. It may be a combination of all of those feelings. And if you have the time, try and figure out why you're feeling that way. What did they say? What did it trigger in you? What button did it push? And third, and most important, don't assume that they are making a personal attack on you until you have more information, unless it's absolutely clear. And then you don't need to ask questions. But if you aren't sure, ask the questions, get the clarification, know what they are referring to so you don't assume a totally incorrect thing that's going to mess things up. You can ask questions like, when you said blah, 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 what did you mean by that? Could you be maybe a little more specific? I'm not sure I understand what you meant. And once you get information, step 5 is to reevaluate your original assumption after you get that more information. But be flexible, because sometimes you don't want to let go of that old assumption. You assume maybe they really did mean it, no matter what they said. So feel into it and make sure that you go with what feels right for you, whether you need to take a higher connection kind of question, take it up to source and pray about it or something. Go ahead and do that if you need to. And the 6th thing is decide how you want to respond. And decide if it's really worth even responding to the thing. Because maybe it's a minimal thing and you're going, if it happens again, I'm aware of it, but it's not important enough. And then maybe the person makes a habit of saying or doing something that bothers you, and you're making these assumptions like, wait a minute, that original assumption, that was right. I need to say something now. Because especially if it's a relationship you've had for a while, or even a new one, you don't want that to continue. Or maybe it won't be able to continue as a relationship. The next thing, and lastly, what do you do when other people make assumptions about something you said or didn't say? Well, first, stay calm. Try not to get angry or feel attacked. And try not to get self-defensive, because we do that. We go on the defensive because we're going, wait, I'm going to attack you now because you are saying something to me. Allow the person to make their assumption and then look at them in curiosity and say, ask them what they heard and how that made them feel. Says, wait, what did I say? If you're angry at me, what did I say? Tell me. I want to know. How did that make you feel? Oh, really? I hurt you. I'm so sorry. What did you think I meant by what I said? And then validate their feelings. You might even say, I feel that way too if someone did or said something to me like that. It doesn't mean you have to say that. But if what they said makes you go, whoa, I didn't mean that, don't even say that. Just ask them what they felt. And say, wow, if someone said something like that to me and that's what I thought they meant, no wonder you feel that way. And you do not need to justify yourself because you didn't do anything wrong. They just misunderstood you. So then you might just want to say, oh, wow, I never meant to hurt you. Maybe if you meant that. Because usually people think something is hurtful or mean, and that's the only time they really react to you, that it makes them angry or it hurts them. Then they'll react and they'll bring it to you. Maybe they'll pile it up forever and then finally say something after the 10th or 12th time, or 10 or 20 years. Then they might say something and then you get really downloaded on. So if they say anything, make sure that you can explain what you meant by what you said, if you can even remember what you said, and ask them after you explain it how they feel now, knowing what you actually meant, and see if they're all right. See if you've resolved that for them. Because you don't want them to have layer upon layer upon layer of issues and assumptions they've made about you that are not true. And staying calm in the face of someone getting really angry or being hurt is usually the hardest part. Because you want to put up your fists and go, wait, I didn't mean that. I didn't say that. Why are you jumping all over me? But no, that's what people are feeling when you do that to them too. So you just have to be gentle in either direction. When you're trying to understand what's happening, come at it from this curiosity standpoint. What did they mean? What did they say? I need to look at this deeper. So let me go over what you can do again when people are making assumptions about you and they confront you. Like I said, number one, most important, stay calm. Try not, take a breath if you have to. Try not to get angry or feel attacked. And don't get a self-defensive kind of attitude about it. Just stay calm. And then ask them what they heard. What did you say that impacted them? Or what you did? And then ask them how they feel if they didn't already tell you, because they might have said, you hurt me when? You said, and you may not have to even ask those questions, but ask them what they thought you meant by what you said or did. And then validate their feelings, because whether you said it and meant it, or whether you didn't understand you said anything at all that bothered them, their feelings should be validated, because they have a right to feel whatever they feel. You just have to let them know. And then next step, rather than justifying yourself, you just say, oh, let me tell you what I meant by that. I never meant to hurt you, if that's true. And then tell them what you meant. And then make sure you check in with them again. To how do they feel now? Is it okay? Are they feeling all right? Have you moved beyond that? Another thing that happens is that sometimes people might say something to you expecting you to react a certain way. So they've made an assumption about you and how you're going to react. It's actually kind of fun to change your response up, because sometimes things shift with the other person and their assumptions are all kind of askew because they don't understand what in the heck happened. So one example, and I haven't done this personally, but I've had my clients do it. If you have kids and you always mediate them, they might have a ton of disagreements, a ton of arguments. They might fight over all kinds of things. Now, if they're more than 3 or 4 years old, you might decide that it's time to do something different. Maybe when they come up to you and they say, blah, 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 Michael did this. No, Donnie did that. And they're arguing and they want you to fix it for them. You look at them and you say, and you say their names and you say, I think you're old enough to figure this out for yourself. You can settle this matter. I don't need to mediate anymore. I trust you. You're old enough to do this. I have to say that whenever the parents have done it and they were the right age, because obviously, like I said, you don't want to do it too young, usually they're boys, but sometimes they're girls or a girl and a boy, and they look at each other after the parent leaves, and usually the parent will hide in the other room so they can still hear what they said, and they'll get this giant pause. No sound whatsoever comes out. And the kids go, really? What do we do now? And they look at each other because they're so shocked that their mother didn't get in the middle and help them, or their father didn't. They generally work it out themselves. And sometimes they even forget what they were arguing about because they're so shocked that the assumption they made that their mother was going to fix everything, it didn't happen, and they said they could do it themselves, they totally forget what's going on. And so because of that, they're in a different place. I have a personal example. I had a shared office space with very small legal offices with two, and this was a long time ago, with 2 other law firms. We had one receptionist, and she handled the other 2 firms, and I handled my one attorney as his own standalone. But when I wasn't at my desk, at the time, this was ancient times, we had a word processor that we could go over, and it was actually, I'm showing my age, but it was, for some reason, we went to other computers rather than the one we were working on to really do the longer stuff. So we'd go over to the other computers and we work really long, and that was nowhere near my desk. It was nowhere near, there was no phones over there for some reason. So I'd have to run all the way over on the other side of the office, back behind the filing cabinets to get to my desk again. And so the understanding was that when I was in a different part of the office, she would answer my phone for my attorney. Well, when she was alone, because normally there were two of them in that office, sometimes she'd be at that word processor station without a phone, and the phone would ring and I'd be at my desk. But I never answered her phone, and we had those old-fashioned phones where you had all those little push buttons and you could see which one was lit up. I didn't answer her phone. That wasn't part of the agreement. So one day she came to me and she said, "Look," and she was really bent out of shape, and she goes, "This isn't fair. Every time you're away from your desk, I have to answer your phone, but you don't have to answer mine." And I thought for a second, and I went, oh, that's really right. She made the assumption I was going to be really pissed off at her and react in some way like, "I don't want to do that for you. I don't have to. It's not in the agreement." Or something like that. I assume that she assumed that. She expected me to do something because of the assumption she made. And my response was, you're right. And she went, "What?" And I said, "I'd be happy to answer the phone when I'm here, but I can't tell when you're over at the word processor because the filing cabinets are in the way. If you can just tell me I'm going to be over here for a bit, I'd be happy to answer your phone." And she went, "Oh." And I have to say that my reaction was so different from the assumption she had made and that expectation that she had for me that her mouth was open. She was shocked. I can still remember her face, even after all these years. And she was so confused, she didn't know how to react to me. And then she was like, oh, well, great. Okay. And we worked it out. And it was that simple. But sometimes it's not. So if you can sometimes kind of change it up a little bit in how you respond to people, and you can see how people are expecting you to respond and what assumptions they've made, and sometimes just don't react the same way they expect. If they think you're going to get angry, you can go, well, I'm curious, and then ask them a question. Instead of getting just pissed off and reacting automatically, you might want to choose to do that. Today we've covered a lot of ground about making assumptions. We looked at what an assumption is, what colors our assumptions, what goes into making the assumptions, how we know when we're actually making the assumption, because sometimes it's so automatic it's hard to tell. And we looked at if our assumptions are actually based on facts, what we can do if our assumptions are wrong. And I've given you a process to use before you make an assumption, and one to use if you have someone confronting you on their assumptions about you and what you've said or done. Try not to make an assumption. As the Oxford Dictionary says, accepting something as true or as certain to happen without proof may not be what you want to do. Assumptions are normal and natural, but realize you may be wrong, and try to be flexible if you discover other information that kind of skews your assumption, either slightly or completely, so that you know that it's kind of an incorrect assumption. It wasn't what that person meant. It wasn't what actually happened. And like I've said before, we assume thousands of times a day, or probably more than that. We go off the evidence we see, which we assume are facts, and come to some sort of conclusion. It can happen immediately, or it can take us some time to figure out how we want to react to something. We might be mulling it over, worrying and wondering how we should approach this person, or if maybe we just get angry and we don't want to approach him. So now you know what the problem is, that we color the evidence with all of our past issues, our stories, and sometimes there really is no evidence, but we assume a conclusion anyway. Assumptions can make us worry. They can create drama and may not be based on truth at all. So next time you feel hurt, worried, angry, or some other lower density type of emotion over something that someone says or does, remember what I've said. Ask questions. Be curious and understand that your assumptions are just that, a guess as to what you think is happening. You have a choice. Try using the process I've given you so you can get to the truth and let you understand what's really going on. Because that way, you don't have to go through the unnecessary worry, the anger, all that stuff that just drags you down and takes you away from being able to live a life of joy. Thank you so much for joining me here today. If you'd like to know more about spiritual or life or business coaching with me or marconics multidimensional energy, please check out my website at www.connecttojoy.com, just like this podcast. And follow me on Instagram at connecttojoy, just as you would expect. Until next week, be courageous and reach higher. Just take one step at a time on your journey and get the help you need, and get out there and find your joy, because you deserve it.
Thank you for listening to Connect to Joy. If you love the show, make sure you rate, review, and share this podcast, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Contact the host, Carol DeChaine, with questions and comments, ideas for future episodes, or if you would like to become a guest. And remember, transformation is a journey and not an end destination. So be kind to yourself, because you are already enough to have the joyful, limitless life that you desire.